Sonic Generations was the first game I ever bought. It was what got me into Sonic the Hedgehog, and to this day, I maintain that it is the most consistently excellent game in the franchise. I could never get past the Death Egg robot, and was too scared to deal with Chemical Plant's risk of drowning, but I used to spend hours playing through modern Green Hill over and over again. No Sonic game before or since has quite scratched the same itch, never quite nailing the sense of speed and the flow states in the same way. Sonic Team made a Faustian bargain to perfect the boost formula, and then had to pay it off with a decade of utter mediocrity that we're only now seeing the end of. While the official games floundered through that regrettable period, SRB2 managed to catch some of the flack. There are plenty of mods that adapt some of the best parts of the Sonic experience, whether that be through characters, physics overhauls, or levels. One of those mods was Modern Sonic, who grew to be a fan favourite due to an accurate rendition of the boost formula. There was just one problem. Modern Sonic didn't really work in SRB2's vanilla levels. They just weren't built to handle him. So, what if we remade them so that they did? That was clearly the thought process behind whitesky's SRB2 Generations, a total overhaul of the campaign that reimagines every zone to fit the boost philosophy. Corridors have been made wider, corners more forgiving, and there's generally a lot more ground to cover. It feels pretty accurate to what these zones would be like in Generations, or indeed Generations, but it isn't quite perfect. In fact, it feels a little bit unfinished in some places. SRB2 Generations replaces the second act of each zone with a new stage, all designed to be played as Modern Sonic. The White World technically allows you to access the unaltered first acts, which are labelled as the classic versions of the zones, but you'd only do so to have an easier time collecting emeralds. These are pretty well made, taking full advantage of Modern Sonic's moveset and offering multiple paths across most of their length. Some are designed to allow other characters to complete each level, some are made to take you to castles of lives and rings, and most importantly, some are hidden or difficult to reach but are the fastest way through the level, incentivizing repeat playthroughs. I've sunk a lot of time into repeating levels, trying to figure out the best route, finding shortcuts and skips, and then executing it perfectly. In that, it adapts the magic of Generations flawlessly. Another place that it matches, and in fact exceeds Generations, is in the length of the new stages. I'd say an SRB2 stage takes around 2 to 3 minutes on average. About the same for a modern stage in Generations, but the average here is closer to 4 or 5 minutes. That's a lot of level to run through, and some levels do exceed that and begin to overstay their welcome, but most of them make a good use of that time. Lots of set pieces, a lot of interesting challenges, even a few mid-level cutscenes to spice things up. The lengthy runtime gives each level the space it needs to try out everything it could ever want to go for, so there was never a point where I finished one and felt that it had missed something. Indeed, something I was repeatedly surprised by was how SRB2 Generations takes aspects of the original zone and remixes them to fit the new level design. Whether that's the collapsing bridge and Grand Hall of Castle Eggman, or the disappearing platform section of Eggrock's final gauntlet, many of the most memorable moments from the original game are here in some capacity, and it never feels like cheap fan service. They all blend seamlessly into the new stuff that tie them together. I'm sure I may have missed some, as some are quite subtle or far removed from their original form. It helps tie these stages to their original form in a way that visuals alone could never. Although that shouldn't be taken as a dig against the aesthetics of each stage. Boost level design requires a lot of open space, and so these zones have been opened up in a way never seen before. The desolation of Egg Rock has never felt so palpable than when running through the new outside sections, and such is the case with the scale of Castle Eggman, or the heights of Arid Canyon. It will even run through sections based on background elements or scrapped versions of some stages, such as a burning cityscape in Techno Hill, or even with how Red Volcano actually begins with a version of Blue Mountain. The remix set pieces and reused textures make each zone recognizable, but they often mix things up with moments like this to help each stage stand out. My personal favourite, as you may have guessed from remarks I've made in the past, is Arid Canyon's train segment, which even seems to take some inspiration from Logarithmic Train. Audio is just as important a part of an experience as the visuals, and SRB2 Generations doesn't slouch here either. Many levels use the themes of roughly analogous locales from Generations. Greenflower uses Green Hill's theme, Techno Hill uses Chemical Plant, etc. But there are other themes from more varied sources. I recognise some of them from other Sonic games, but there were a few I can't recall hearing before. They all feel consistent though, fitting in right alongside Generations' relatively fast and upbeat OST. Perhaps it could be argued that the original songs would fit better, or even remixes of the original level themes if whitesky knew a composer who could produce those. But I disagree. I think the use of these songs tie the level pack closer to Generations, which is, of course, the overall aim. Unfortunately, for as much as SRB2 Generations is a strong package, it has several flaws. They're all fairly minor, but the number of them begin to add up over time, especially as most intensify as the level pack progresses. Greenflower and Deep Sea lack many problems, but Red Volcano and especially Egg Rock have a lot. Firstly, the pack has an obsession with integrating modern Sonic's wall jumping in ways that destroy the pacing of a level. It is usually used in this context. You run through a compelling section with a loader speed, are faced with a long vertical climb that can only be scaled by repetitively jumping between two walls, find your momentum and flow decimated as you grind to a halt, before you get to continue having fun 10 to 15 seconds later. It is a constant barrage of moments like this by the end of the pack, and I think Egg Rock is something like 3 to 4 of these copy-paste climbs. It would hardly be a problem if it happened once or twice, but it becomes a debilitating crutch. It almost feels like whitesky couldn't think of any other way to bridge vertical gaps, put these in as a quick placeholder, and then forgot to replace them before release. They are a constant, repetitive, often unskippable nuisance that add very little to each level they inhabit. But an overuse of wall jumping is not the only way that Egg Rock becomes repetitive. By far the longest level in the pack, clocking in at nearly twice the length of Red Volcano, it outright repeats level segments upwards of a dozen times to hit that target length. It's said the repetition can be used to highlight how important something is, but I'm not sure what whitesky wants me to take away from the 4th time I'm stunted through this twisting corridor, or the 3rd time I need to avoid hitting a Lancerbot to make a jump. SRB2 is hardly lauded for his combat modern Sonic only slightly improving on it due to the snappiness of his homing attack, but someone clearly likes it a lot. Why else would I be mandated to clear a room of enemies for progressing umpteen different times? It begins to feel like the majority of Egg Rock is taken up by cloned segments, to extremely diminished returns. Being interesting or cool once does not guarantee being interesting or cool forever. Egg Rock forcing the player to slowly whittle down rooms of Lancerbots represents a problem through much of the level pack. SRB2 Generations just does not understand how enemies are used in the boost formula. In most of these games, enemies are mainly used as fodder, lacking complicated attack patterns, and often being stuck in place. This is a common point of criticism, but it makes sense for the formula. You have few tools to deal with them, especially with a camera and movement unsuited to maneuver around them. Better to have them stand still and act as an obstacle for an unwary player, while letting more experienced ones blast right past. Here, the usage of Bannex like Crustaceans and Lancerbots goes against that ethos. They're too aggressive, too bulky, too awkward to deal with. Just enough of a nuisance to inconvenience you, slow you down, but not enough of one to actually be worth dealing with. They'll knock you out of your rhythm, but then don't offer enough of a challenge to justify that. Enemies like crawlers, buzzes, green snappers, egg pawns, and turrets are much more in line with the enemies seen in boost titles, so it's no surprise that they end up being utilised far better than their more dangerous brethren. I have 2 more complaints, but they all seem to be far more to do with the failings of modern Sonic over SRB2 Generations. I'll list them to serve as a warning for anyone interested in playing the mod, but don't consider it criticism of this mod at least. The first problem is to do with grinding. For objects used in as many mods as they are, the grind rails in SRB2 are incredibly janky. The particular problem here is how you can drop through them using Custom 3, which just so happens to be the same command used to perform air tricks as modern Sonic. There are several times throughout the level pack where you're incentivized to be performing these tricks, only to end up launched into a grind rail that you're immediately phased through as the game finishes reading your trick inputs. It seems that there are a few problems with how modern Sonic reads these inputs, because this is not the only problem I've had with them, but this is definitely the most serious, losing me a lot of time on multiple occasions. The second problem is one that I find very common anywhere in SRB2, but the higher speed of SRB2 Generations makes it particularly severe here. There's a real problem with SRB2 eating your jump inputs near ledges, as a complete lack of coyote time means that any delay in the reading of an input as you approach a fall can lead to it being read as impossible when it finally triggers. Like I said, this is all too common even at the slower speeds of vanilla SRB2, but faster characters, modern Sonic being chief among them, make it a constant risk. There were too many times to count where I jumped well in advance of a ledge, only for the delay in input recognition, perhaps caused by how I play on controller, I don't really know, to see that command ignored and me to plummet like a stone. Incredibly frustrating every time it happens, and while it isn't really a fault of SRB2 Generations, it was my most common gripe when playing it. For the majority of its playtime, SRB2 Generations is fantastic, finally giving modern Sonic something to play with that actually understands and uses his moveset. It does a good job of giving SRB2 the modern treatment, physically, visually, and auditorily. I found myself repeating stages far more often than I usually would for these reviews, chasing better times and smoother paths, and I can see myself continuing to do so long after this video goes live. It has serious flaws though, some admittedly the result of things outside of its control, but many are of its own doing. Levels sometimes feel unfinished in some ways, or at least suffer significant drops in quality at certain points, a problem that becomes more severe as the pack progresses. Egg Rock especially suffers from repetition and awkward pace breakers, which can make what should be the exciting climax feel a little bit dull in some places. None of these things ever ruin the pack, but it does hold it back from its highest potential, and I think it could do with just one more draft to smooth some of them out. An excellent mod, but still with room for improvement. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Tune in next time, but for now, ciao.